And again, I want to welcome you to Indigenous food sovereignty within the urban context. And I am going to welcome Robert and Adrienne and Tanya to begin the session and introduce themselves. So thank you so much for joining us at the ECOM conference today.
So good morning, everybody. Mino Gajep, Tansei, Tanshe, and I just want to start with acknowledging Takaranto. Takaranto is a Mohawk word, which means where the weirs stand out of the water, where the trees stand out of the water. And at this time of year, being spring, and the spring run, there would have been walleye and pike, sucker, and sturgeon being caught in the nets. Next slide, please.
Good morning.
We're going to introduce ourselves. And Kiskia Tamoan Esqueo, and Kindaso Nkwe Indishnakas. That means knowledge woman in both Cree and Anishinaabe. I am Métis Cree and Saulteaux from Treaty 4 area and a long line through the Red River Métis. And the Métis Cree and Saulteaux are known as the Three Sister Nations, people of the buffalo. And this was taught to me by Elder Maria Campbell. And I just want to say welcome to everybody. Robert or Adrienne?
Merci, Tanya. My name is Robert Durocher. I am Métis from Ontario on my father's side and French. And I will pass it off to Adrienne.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Adrienne Plumley. I'm Mi'kmaq, Métis, Scottish, and Welsh, and I have the pleasure of working with Tanya and Robert at the Urban Indigenous Education Centre.
So mentioned earlier by Haley, talking about the dish with one spoon wampum. We're just going to dig into this a little deeper while we're here. So Taktarano also falls into the territory which is part of the dish with one spoon wampum, which was between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Anishinaabe Nation, and still is between them and still apart. So if you think about the wampums, they're actually made from shells that come from the lakes. So they are actually part of the earth. When we think about the dish with one spoon and we think about the context within food sovereignty and environmentalism, it's the concept that we're going to take what we need. We're not going to take more than what we need. We're going to keep that bowl clean so others can use it. We're going to keep the spoon clean for whoever needs to use it as well. Adrienne, next slide.
So through this presentation, there will be a focus on the development of an Urban Indigenous food sovereignty program that was guided and supported by the Elders Council through the Urban Indigenous Education Centre at the Toronto District School Board. As participants, we hope that you will learn about how the program centers Indigenous ways of knowing and being through holistic, so including mind, body, heart, and spirit approaches, and works with and learns from Indigenous community partners. So our learning goals for everyone at this session are the distinction between food security and Indigenous food sovereignty, understanding Indigenous food sovereignty, and relationality, including the 4 R's framework. So as we talk about the 4 R's, they represent respect, relevance, reciprocity, and responsibility, excuse me. So when we look at respect, and this particular framework was developed by Verna Kirkness and Ray Bernhardt, who are 2 Indigenous scholars. So when we look at respect, we're talking about cultural knowledge, traditions, values, activities that individuals bring with them to all of their learning experiences. Responsibility talks about demands that instructor shares responsibility for change, even if not personally disadvantaged by the barriers of the learner. And when we look at that, in particular, we're looking at the removal of hierarchy between educators and instructors and students as learners. For reciprocity, we're looking at referring to revising of relationships between student and instructor from a hierarchy to that of a relationship focused on mentorship. In this way, both individuals are viewed as learners. And then with relevance, we're looking at occurs when respect is embedded in the curricula, instruction, and policy. So not necessarily as a standalone learning opportunity, but embedded throughout all learning opportunities.
Thank you. So we'd like to start with this Indigenous Food Sovereignty program has been really guided by the Elders Council that support the board through the Urban Indigenous Education Centre and also through Kapapa Wandering Spirit School. We reclaimed the name. The original name is Wandering Spirit, started in 1976 by Elder Pauline Shirt and the late Vern Harper. And very much guided by these principles, Indigenous principles around the holistic approach, which encompass the intellectual and the physical, emotional, and spiritual aspects of self, all interrelated, as is with the 4 R's framework. Also guided by the 13 grandmother moons and 4 seasons. And the school's motto has been and continues to be Indigenous education through self-determination. So this is a picture here that you see of Elder Pauline Shirt. And I was the former principal of the school, and now I'm the superintendent for Indigenous education with the responsibilities of the school. And the program is the first of its kind in the province. We worked with the Ministry of Education and the Indigenous Education Office to get this program up and running, and also to hire a chef, an Indigenous chef that we have, and also to embed these ways of knowing and being within the construct of the program. We know that it's been an incredibly difficult year and continues to be with COVID. And there are a number of principles that we are engaging with this, including Indigenous land-based education and knowledge through Indigenous education. And we are also working with partners, the University of Toronto's Waakabenez Bryce Institute with Dr. Suzanne Stewart, engaging in some upcoming workshops that we'll be doing on Indigenous food sovereignty, and moving forward in a good way together with our partners. So it's a very holistic approach, and very much embedded in these ways of knowing and being, and also looking at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's calls to action that upholds the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as the framework for moving forward and in reconciliation, and along with our food systems, reclaiming Indigenous food systems, and also language revitalization embedded in that. I want to acknowledge the Indigenous food sovereignty chef, Joanna Simon, and she was born and raised in Toronto and Wikwamikong. She's Mi'kmaq and Anishinaabe, and she was a fancy shawl dancer for many years and has been cooking her entire life. Her mom used to be a powwow vendor for food, and Joanna is thrilled to be a part of this program and to shape it together, and being informed by Indigenous ways of knowing and being, and the guidance and wisdom of the elders that we have, sourcing various foods from Indigenous peoples who engage in this work, including wild rice from James Wutong from Curve Lake, Miigwech. Next slide. So this is an image that was done by a student. Robert, do you have the name of the student so we can give credit?
I don't have it on the top of my mind. I can look it up while you talk, and then I can come back and tell you. She is a student from the Central Toronto Academy, and the teacher is Becky DeLeo, and I will look up the name of the student.
Thank you so much. Now, I was speaking with Elder Dr. Duke Redbird this morning, and he has given permission to share the teachings with regard to the food forest and the 7 canopies, as he has relayed it. And so what he's saying is, Mother Earth taught us, among other lessons, that there are 7 principles of good conduct, and they are called the 7 ancestral teachings, and were imparted to us from the 7 canopies of food that are found in the food forest. The first canopy are the oldest trees that grow the tallest in the forest and protect all other plants. Among these tall trees are the walnut, the chestnut, the beech nut, and the maple trees. For them, we learn wisdom. For example, the meat of the walnut is shaped like the human brain, and modern science tells us what our ancestors already knew, that walnuts provide nutrition for the mind, along with the sap from the maple tree. Therefore, we call the tallest trees in the food forest the canopy of wisdom. The second canopy of food is available in the food forest are the fruit trees, representing amongst many others by the plum and cherry, the apple and the pear. Fruit trees are challenged by harsh winters, storms, hurricanes, and droughts, and still as fragile as they appear to be, give their fruit, which represents courage to us. The third canopy of the food available in the food forest are the blueberries and the berry bushes, raspberry, blueberry, thimbleberry, gooseberry, bearberry. The berry bushes are self-fertilized and self-propagating and grow together amongst each other, and they come in different colors and shapes and tastes and textures. Yet they exist and thrive in harmony with one another. We learn respect from these berry bushes. The next canopy of food that lives in the food forest is that it grows right above the ground, such as squash, pumpkin, cucumbers, cabbages, and lettuce. There's an honesty about these foods. The fact that they are trusted and are evidently good for you shows in their very existence that they never counterfeit. They teach us honesty. The fifth canopy of the food forest is the food found on the surface of the ground. Here we find our medicines. We sort the poison ivies from the good ivies, the poison oaks from the good oaks, the mushrooms from the toadstools. Truth is always in accord with fact and reality, and it is up to us to separate fact from fiction. That is what we learn from this canopy, which also includes the strawberry, which represents the earth itself. Unlike every other fruit, the seeds of the strawberries are on the surface of the fruit, as we, the humans, occupy the surface of the earth. The strawberry also is shaped like a heart, and strawberries are good for your heart. And in fact, Anishinaabe Mowin word for Debwewin, meaning truth and heartbeat. Beneath the canopy of truth in the forest, we find potatoes, carrots, turnips, and other vegetables which are buried under the ground, and they are not necessarily evident on the surface. We must dig and search for them, often on our knees in the process. We learn about humility from these foods, being close to the earth. And the seventh canopy are the creepers and the vines that grow through the woods and embrace the other plants. From them, we learn love, wisdom, courage, respect, honesty, truth, humility, and love. These are the 7 ancestral teachings, and they guide us, and we practice them in many Indigenous ways of knowing and being. So on behalf of Elder Dr. Duke Redbird, miigwech.
Miigwech to you, Tanya, merci, Tanya, and to Duke for sharing those teachings. I am very fortunate to work with Duke at the Urban Indigenous Education Centre. The name of the student artist is Lindsay Buckingham, and she gave permission to her teacher to share it with us, and we will be getting that image printed for Duke as a gift for all of the beautiful teachings he offers us. So the Urban Indigenous Education Centre is part of Toronto District School Board, and we function within, we try to be as self-determined as possible within a structure of a school board. But we have 7 canopies and pillars and lodge poles that guide the work that we do. Our first one is professional learning. So we have a team of instructional leaders, culture and traditions teachers, and a student support team that work to provide professional learning for teachers, all educators within the board, and other staff as well. And we align that work with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Canada's calls to action 62 and 63, but beyond that as well. So for example, the NAC 10 program, which is the grade 9 arts course, the NBE 3 course, so ongoing professional development for all educators. Community engagement. We work with a community, we have a community liaison team who works with families, caregivers, and community agencies to support our students, their families, and other community agencies. As well, the community agencies support the work that we do to support teachers. For example, last year, before COVID shut down, we had our first employment fair within the building. So all kinds of organizations came and we invited people from the community. Another way we do community engagement is that we work to do the annual powwow, which this year will be more of a virtual social. Student voice. So we have a program called ONSE, which is an Anishinaabe word for transformation. And so, and we think about, we work with schools that have the highest proportion of self-identified First Nation, Métis, Inuit students. We work with the teachers in the building and the administrators to do collaborative inquiry to see how we can better support the learning and well-being of the Indigenous students within the building. And of course, that impacts the learning of all students and teachers within the building. Partnerships. I've worked with partnerships, educational partnerships. And this is where we reach out to community to look for artists, writers, activists, authors, people doing work in food sovereignty to become a partner so that they can work in classrooms and schools. So for example, with the NAC 10 program that I was talking about, or course for grade 9s, is we have artists that work with teachers in classrooms to do cultural teachings, because non-Indigenous folks should not be doing the cultural teachings. So we hire people that can provide some of that as well as the creative work. Programming, curriculum development, and implementation. So we work to develop curriculum that can be used within classrooms, but also looking at how do we have programming that supports all learning within the board. Research, development, and innovation. And so, for example, some of the work that we're doing here with food sovereignty is part of that research that we do. Reconciliation, relationship, and governance is another pillar of the 7 canopies that we work. Adrienne? Tanya, this is you.
Thank you. Another thing to add with regard to the 7 canopies is the work around professional learning and the plans moving forward. is also centering Indigenous student voice. There will be opportunities with regard to students to have co-op credits, also students in other culinary programs, for example, will be able to do a practicum. We're looking at apprenticeship and opportunities for entrepreneurship, combined credits and dual credits, which is something that we are going to be working towards as well. And of course, continuing to engage community through our Elders Council and the knowledge and wisdom keepers that we work with. Also working very closely with the Urban Indigenous Community Advisory Committee of the Toronto District School Board through the Urban Indigenous Education Centre, having community kitchens and working with other Indigenous chefs and creating a speaker series. So those are some of the plans on the horizon. So what I'd like to speak to is Indigenous food sovereignty. There's many different definitions about Indigenous food sovereignty, as you know, based on place and space from which these ideas come forth. But fundamentally, the differences between food security and Indigenous food sovereignty is that food security seeks to address the issue of food and hunger through the current dominant food regime, whereas food sovereignty challenges this paradigm and seeks to build alternatives and attempts to address the root causes through a bottom-up grassroots approach in order to look at the ideological underpinnings of food sovereignty. We must first understand its relationship to food security. And through Indigenous food sovereignty, centering Indigenous ways of knowing and being, and looking at self-determination and reclaiming our food systems. So it is very much linked to Indigenous land-based ways of knowing and being, and looking at Indigenous knowledge as the way forward with regard to sustainability, and continuing to look at the dish with one spoon, never soloing the dish, and always making sure that the dish is full, that it's never empty. And that's our responsibility as human beings in relationship to Mother Earth. Next slide. Adrienne?
So we just want to give an opportunity for folks to ask questions. Please feel free to drop them in the chat. And we will do our best to get to all of them in the order that they come through in.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So we encourage anyone that has a question, please feel free to pop it in the chat. Yeah.
Could be any questions or comments, anything that you'd like to know more about with regard to the Urban Indigenous Education Centre at the TDSB?
Should we raise our hands or should we unmic? Do you have a preference?
Not really. Whatever you wish to do.
I'm on my phone, so I don't have access to chat. So I have a question, but I want to not take the first place if there's someone who's in the chat.
No, go ahead.
All right, then I will. Miigwech, thank you so much. And I apologize that I'm on my phone multitasking what we have to do. My name's Lisa Taylor. I teach at Bishop's University, and I wanted to thank you for sharing the teachings of the canopy, that those teachings showed the ways that those relationships that we have are teaching us values, are teaching us ways of living that was really valuable for me to hear. I don't really have a question because I think most of the materials you develop are only available within the TDSB. So we need to develop our own.
Thank you, Miigwech. I see in the chat, there's a question from Doug. Hi, Doug, how are you?
I'm good, hi.
So your question is, how hard is it to get outside within the Toronto District School Board from your perspective and experience? So I'd like to answer that. And I also see that David Hocker-Budlowski is here as well. So I don't mean to put you on the spot, David, but if you could also maybe speak to this this question. So Doug, it really depends on the situation and where the school is situated. At Kapapamachkwe, we have a very large field in the back. We have 2 front yards, and we can go on walking excursions and whatnot. But we know that COVID has had quite an impact. However, at the school, many teachers have been working outside with the teachers, with the students, and working with Jimmy and Marie at the school, and also receiving teachings from Elder Pauline Shirt, for example. It has been challenging, and perhaps you could speak to that too, please. That would be very helpful, because I know that you have a wealth of knowledge in this area.
You talking to me?
Yes.
Oh, well, yeah, I guess I like what Louise added, like what the enablers are. We all know what the barriers are, of course. My sense is you've described it pretty accurately, and I don't know how other boards are, but I think it depends on where the school is located. And often my experience has been that wealthier schools are ready to jump outside quickly. It's not hard and fast rule, but the general trend from sort of talking to different schools is that schools that are more challenged or have less resources are they're more somehow cowed by bureaucratic rules for one reason or another, and they have some amazing outdoor spaces, but they're more reticent to go out. So I don't know how that speaks to privilege or not, but and I'm thinking of schools in a sort of outer ring, like the downtown schools tend to be a little more ready to go out, and then there's schools that in neighborhoods where there's food insecurity, where it'd be good to have them out in community gardens, where they are less likely to want to go out. So I don't know what's like across the country, but that's been my experience so far.
Thank you, Doug. So one of the things is at Kapapamachkwe, we've moved to 16 Finn, which is the former site of Eastern Commerce. And many of the students arrive at school through transportation, through the buses, because they don't necessarily live in the area. So being outside as much as possible, especially during this time of COVID, is really critical. And it's working with the teachers as well on doing that. So we do have sort of an infrastructure that's built within the school that centers Indigenous ways of knowing and being. And so, David, would you like to say something to this?
Thank you so much. And it's such an important question, and we do want students outside, and we do know that every school, no matter where you are, is dealing with unique and interesting challenges and spaces. Here in Toronto, we're very fortunate to have access to a lot of public green space. Student safety is always paramount, and I think that's always a concern that's sitting on an administrator's shoulder as well when we're having those discussions in schools. But if going outside is part of the regular program and practice, it's easier to get outside more frequently and then widen the range and area that you're able to visit comfortably, safely, and work forward, move to. So in TDSB, we do have blanket walking excursions in the immediate community. It's going to be that local decision making on what that level of comfort is. But again, that comfort's going to increase the more opportunities there are with the students. And oftentimes, we know that some of those challenges that arise in a classroom disappear when students have that opportunity to come outside. Sometimes the natural environment actually can help focus students on the task at hand, and most certainly open up the questions and inquiry that the students have that can lead just to so many valuable opportunities. So there definitely are challenges, but there are definitely ways to overcome them. And the biggest thing is taking every opportunity to get outside and understanding the spaces that are available to you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for sharing, David. I see another question here in the chat. It's from Natalie Bakodi. Did you want to speak to the question, Natalie? Okay, I'll read the question. The question is, do you know if the 7 canopies of the food forest is a pan-Indigenous teaching? Is it shared among First Nations across Canada, or one of the specifics? So I'm going to say that I wouldn't say that it is across all the different ways of knowing and being in terms of Indigenous knowledges. It is Anishinaabe and shared with other Indigenous ways of knowing and being, but what's central, the concept that's central that is across all Indigenous ways of knowing and being, is that everything is interrelated, everything is connected, and that speaks to the relationality. So thanks for that question. Now we have Tori. Really great that you're on here, Tori. You wanted to speak to the experiences with regard to teachers.
Hi, nice to see you virtually. I just wanted to add in as a teacher in Toronto that there are loads of, as we've seen throughout the conference, loads of opportunities to get outside, but the biggest limitation in response to the question that was asked is, I find anyway, is the supervision of students outside. So it also speaks to what David was saying about feeling safe and comfortable outside with a large group of students and in our spaces. So the Outdoor Ed Centers help tremendously with that, of course. And I've worked with them before too, just in providing that extra, I guess, staffing is sort of what it comes down to sometimes.
Thank you, Tori. Any other questions or comments?
I think I see one that came in earlier from Louise. It says, how does your work enable children or students to be on the land in a regular way?
Adrienne or Robert?
I can speak from my personal experience. Prior to moving into this role, I was a kindergarten teacher at Papamachukwe Wandering Spirit School. And the work that was being done at that time through the UIEC and continues to happen was really about building strong relationship with our Outdoor Education Centre and David. And that has definitely carried through. And when we look at some of the enablers that allowed us to spend so much time on the land, it was definitely having a good relationship with our admin and our families, and also a supportive admin, who was Tanya, that sort of really encouraged us to spend time on the land with our students. And then also having a partnership with an organization that allowed us to provide the right kind of clothing for our students to wear when they were outside. So having those wetsuits and the boots, so that if children were arriving and they didn't have clothing that would keep them warm and dry, we were able to provide that for them. So that's just one example that I can speak to.
Thank you, Adrienne.
Actually, I'm going to pick up on something that Doug put in the chat around wealthier schools having created classrooms with gardens, etc. And I think for me, it's something that I do want to acknowledge and talk about in the ways in which privilege, the environmental education a lot of times and movements is a very white privileged space. And for example, Indigenous communities that have been doing the work for a long, long time, a lot of times don't actually get acknowledged or brought into the conversation. If we think about youth doing the work, for example, Gretchen, I forget her last name because I prefer Autumn Peltier's work. But like Gretchen, everyone knew Gretchen. And Autumn Peltier, who's doing the work here along with her grandmother, or aunt, sorry, excuse me, you know, they didn't get the same sort of acknowledgement. And so when I think about the work that needs to be done is we also need to bring in, even though Indigenous education is different from equity work, Indigenous education is about sovereignty and self-determination, we do need to have those equity and anti-oppression conversations about why certain schools do environmentalism as in gardens in one ways and certain schools don't. Yeah, and I've seen it. Now, when I was a classroom teacher, I was very, I loved the place. The students there taught me so much, but I taught at Rose Avenue Public School, Sherborne and Bloor. It's basically a concrete area. Our lawn was fake, for lack of a better word, but we partnered with, we were very lucky that we could partner with Allen Gardens, and we did have a school garden. That was due to the advocacy of the administration in the building, that we had spaces where the students could work in the gardens. And to talk about the supervision, you know, I'd have a class of 28 grade sixes, and we did a lot of community building at the beginning. We do a lot of circles, and I was able to go out on my own with 28 students downtown. So when we build up that relationship and understanding responsibility, it can be done. That's my contribution for now. I always forget to unmute.
I was speaking too.
You're into this.
I forgot
like,
to unmute
where's
as
the
well.
mute button? What am I doing here? Are there any more questions?
There's some comments in there. Robert, perhaps you can read them.
Yeah. So I touched upon what Doug was saying, because I think we need to have this conversation. So agreed on class size. We are delivering a new land-based course for early childhood educators, and we have 45 to 50 in a class. We are working to co-teach this course, so this helps in the class sizes, but we also have to talk about this in terms of working with young children, risk versus benefit, and changing mindsets about risk. What could be considered risk for many are incredible opportunities for self-developed knowledge, connections, belonging, social skills, ability, nurture, spirit. That's beautiful.
And, I mean, so as for me too, and I definitely am all about risky play with students. And again, that was about, for me, building relationship with families and making sure they understood that risky play didn't necessarily equal dangerous play. And that there were always folks around to support the children in exploring things that some folks might not be comfortable with. And it is, again, like you said, about the individual educator's comfort level with the level of risk that you're willing to take and to allow your learners to take. But it's an amazing opportunity, excuse me, for students to really kind of explore their own boundaries too, with supportive educators nearby.
I mean, I probably did things that I probably shouldn't have, but like, for example, when it'd be June, my class and I, we'd walk down to the lake around Cherry Beach. I mean, it took us about an hour to get there, but we'd walk, take little steps. We'd spend the day by the lake together. You know, the students would climb on rocks. We'd have a talk about not going in the water. But because I did the relationship building all year, the care that they had for each other and the understanding that when we're going to be in this beautiful place by the water, we're not going to litter, we're not going to leave a foot mark. And then we'd walk back home And I just thought those were those moments where the learning on how to take care of each other by being outside together was beautiful things that I think don't necessarily happen just in the classroom. Now, did I have students once in a while that would push the limit? Absolutely. Like, everyone has that. Okay, we have a thank you for sharing your experiences in wealth and wisdom. I'm filled with soul. I send energy and light. Thank you. Thank you. Miigwech from Doug. Thank you. Marcy.
Thank you. So the other thing I'd like to speak to with regard to Indigenous food sovereignty and Indigenous food systems is this is really speaking to the legacy of the dispossession of Indigenous peoples from lands, and really look at a anti-colonial type of lens. And so the dispossession of Indigenous peoples from the lands and the legacy of Indian residential schools, and what occurred, the atrocities, and also speaking to the what's known as the 5 white gifts that were rations that were sent to Indigenous peoples, and in looking at white flour and sugar and lard and milk and salt, and really trying to reclaim traditional food sources, etc., and looking at a holistic paradigm of health in relation to the land. And we will be engaging in developing some curriculum so that students also have the opportunity to create their own garden, know how things grow, to nurture that, you know, planting the seed, so to speak, in moving forward, and what is termed as Minabamadzawin, which is Anishinaabe meaning to live a good life, and that life is really centered on this having good relations and good relations with Mother Earth and all of its creation.
I just want to add something, just because you made me think about something, Tanya. And we're thinking about, you know, our topic here. We're talking about Indigenous food sovereignty. We're talking about land-based pedagogy. But if you think classroom teachers, the sort of cross-curricular connections that come in when we start thinking about food, we're looking at STEM, we're looking at language, we're looking at the arts, and how they're all interconnected in beautiful ways. And then something that you said about seeds, Tanya, reminds me of, you know, as in the work that we do, sometimes we hope to leave seeds and that they grow. And that's hopefully some of the work that we've done today has planted some seeds.
Miigwech.
Marcy.
So I think that brings us to the end of our meeting.
Yeah.
And if you have any further questions, please reach out to the Urban Indigenous Education Centre, 416-393-9600.
Thank you so much, Robert and Adrienne and Tanya, for sharing that. And I'm making so many connections to the keynote by Christy Belcourt and Isaac Murdoch, and your words around, you know, food sovereignty challenging the current paradigm. And you know, they talked, Christy and Isaac talked so much about, yeah, shaking up the system as well, and going back to the knowledge of the traditional peoples of this land, and you know, the importance of that, of connecting to land. And so much of what you said today connected to what they shared as well, and centering Indigenous ways of knowing, and reclaiming, as you said, Indigenous food systems. So thank you so much for adding and contributing to the conversation and our learning as we move forward together. So we really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Haley. Just before we go, I see Sylvia. Is that Sylvia Plath? Sylvia has a thing here she'd like to reach out. Sylvia, I'm aware of your work. Please do. And you have written here, you'd love to reach out to see how we can work together and run a land-based education program, Great Lakes Canoe Journey, that teaches youth how to build birch bark canoes. I know that you've probably done some work at the Native Learning Center downtown, I believe. Is that you? Yeah. Oh, Plain, Sylvia Plain. Thank you. Sylvia Platt's a writer. So I got the names confused. Thank you so much. Yes, please do.
All right, wonderful. So if there are no more comments or questions, I'm going to say Chimiquetch, and we'll see you out there.
Okay.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.